Coogs house. Reports are that the Big 12 turned down free money and turned away Houston's old rival because they felt so bad about how badly the Cougs would beat down Memphis. Memphis turned away from the Big 12.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Picking your first listen each and every day is the everyday that you are here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation but you don't know what to say, tell us which exciting victory over Memphis was your favorite. Was the big comeback at the end of the football game? Was it the Tremont Mark shot? Was it the Jamal Shed shot? Which victory was it? Today's show is brought to you by a couple folks we'll be telling you about later. But man, oh man, the news of the day is that Memphis thought they're heading to the Big 12 and will not be. That's going to be the first segment. I also talk in the second segment something about like who leaked it, who benefits from this news outside of those of us like internet jokes. And third and final segment, obviously, is how does this tie to our Houston Cougars. But first, I believe Ross Dellinger had the article first. I want to give him credit there. I've also seen a lot of talk about Nicole Arbach. I've also seen Brett McMurphy. I think Front Office Sports did a whole deal. Lots of people talking about this. But Monday afternoon, reports surfaced that Memphis offered the numbers ranged from 150 to 250 million dollars, depending on which report you're looking at, in sponsorship money to join the Big 12. Memphis also reportedly would foot their own exit bill with the American Athletic Conference. Theoretically, in this deal, FedEx, as a major sponsor for Memphis, would be helping to sponsor conference and the conference itself, conference title games, and so on, as would Lowe's and AutoZone. All three of those major companies and sponsor opportunities have ties to Memphis. FedEx founder is Memphis alum. The current Lowe's CEO is a Memphis alum, and the VP of comms at AutoZone is on the Memphis board. They've got a lot of ties to those companies. Those companies would be making up this. Again, some reports were 150, some reports was high as $250 million in sponsorship. Memphis also said that they would apparently opt to take $0 in revenue, akin to what SMU did with the ACC, meaning they would take zero TV dollars, not a partial share, not a third of a share, a $0 share in TV revenue to join the power conference that is the Big 12. They also, and I thought was interesting, were willing to add an opt-out or expulsion clause after the 2030-31 seasons, the athletics academic school year, and if the Big 12 voted, they could expel Memphis in the summer of 2031 if they didn't feel as a conference that Memphis was adding any value. Again, Dellinger had it closer to 150. I think McMurphy had it up at 250. I think it was NBC had it at 200. Everyone's had different numbers on this, but Dellinger did have an anonymous source that pointed out that Memphis had gone through the vetting process back in 2022 when the Big 12 added Central Florida, Cincinnati, BYU, and Houston. And back then, Memphis was not up to snuff. And the frank question was, what has Memphis done since then to prove that they are further up to snuff? Now, obviously, this deal is a little bit different, so it's not just adding a school, but in that 2021-2022 era, right, UCF was undefeated, called themselves national champs in 2017 football. Cincinnati had a college football playoff berth in 2021. BYU's got its international brand. Houston was in the American Athletic Conference title game in football and had just made it to the Final Four in 2021 as well. All of that is to say that those four schools showed athletic promise at the high dollar earning level in revenue sports. Memphis hadn't done it then, and bluntly hasn't done a whole lot of that since either. And the conference was in a much more desperate spot back then. Since then, they've added the four we mentioned. Central Florida, Cincy, BYU, and Houston, and the four corner schools from the Pac-12. And the Pac-12 was essentially destroyed by the Big 12. And I think that's a big factor here, too. The situation is just not the same, right? Once the Big 12 took down the Pac-12, you suddenly you were sitting pretty. You got 16 teams. You brought in four that have Power Four experience. You also Houston is making waves in a revenue sport. BYU has shown they can increase the dollar amount and compete here. Like these things make sense. Memphis, I guess you could say, has gotten big gifts and donors. They're getting a FedEx NIL package or a commitment from FedEx about NIL that, if that stands through the House settlement and Deloitte kind of things, is a lot of money annually. Um, it also, though, feels like Memphis is dealing with a different problem every 18 months. As recently as last Friday, they got put on probation over some eligibility issues where softball players were taking basketball players' tests or something. This 2-year probation is just the latest. You had Penny's recruiting violations 2021, the whole James Wiseman thing. You go back to Derrick Rose in the CUSA days. I mean, they seem to always have something circulating around Memphis. And I don't think that played no part in this by any stretch. I know that the folks there will probably be commenting on this video below that, oh, they're always coming after us. And that might be fair and true, but they always come and find something when they're looking for Memphis as well. The consensus report is that the Big 12 said no. Front Office Sports even reported that it didn't get it to a vote, with an anonymous source saying it was clear relatively quickly that the interest wasn't there. And I think that's the most condemning thing of this whole deal, is that to open American Athletic Conference Media Days, in which they're rebranding the whole conference, everyone's tweeting out new graphics and a part of the conference, this hits and smashes and shatters all kinds of things. Full disclosure, there's a whole separate episode of Locked On Coogs about to come out where Brian and I had talked about recruiting stuff, because that's what I had projected to be a bit of news on Tuesday, was kind of recapping some Houston Cougar football recruiting stuff going on. This dropping Monday afternoon out of nowhere prompted a lot of what is going on kind of reactions out of people. For what it's worth, the Big 12 turning down $250 million potentially in sponsorship dollars is a big dollar amount on paper to look at. I think it's also telling a lot of people whoa, the Big 12's in a spot where they're turning that kind of money. I would point out that 250 million or 150 million or whatever millions it is in sponsorship dollars are not the same kind of liquid, tangible dollars you could throw into your 20.5 million pay athletes right away. Right now, it's not to say that wouldn't trickle its way into your budgeting at all. As a conference, I don't mean to say that. I mean to say that just money is money in some ways. But as far as liquid money, I can do something. I can pay checks with it right now. That's not quite the same thing. I do think there's some interesting ways in which that is being tossed around and talked about, in looking at how this information came about. Right. Memphis is not going to be in the Big 12 anytime soon, though I think that's fairly safe to say. I will say I thought this had been off the table for a while, did not know that Memphis is trying to bring it back to the table. And for what it's worth, when I remember, back in the day when Houston was in the American, right? That was just so long ago. I really think that some true story, be going back to 1995 with Houston, though. You feel for a program that feels locked out of the evolving college football landscape. And full disclosure, for Memphis and other folks in Group of Six conferences in terms of football, I would worry about post 2031. If you're not in the game by then, you might just never get in it. The way these things are changing and shifting, and the reason that summer is so important in regards to TV contracts, it because of TV contracts and dates and those changing over and new shares and all that kind of stuff. It's a real chance that that's the final nail in the coffin in a lot of ways, in separating Division One FBS into two separate entities, two different levels of football. But we'll talk about that when it comes. We don't have to worry about that till then. Houston's in the right side of that right now, and so that's all good. I am interested, though, as we look at this information, as why it came out, when it came out, and who put it out there. And so I want to take some looks at that in a second. Before we get too far, though, today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, you ever said last minute ago that Astros game, that common show, your favorite band's coming to town, you need to go to a concert? Last minute tickets right now at Game Time, the best place to get last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. It's the easiest way because you can save money on tickets to then go splurge on food, drinks, merch, more people to bring with you. Whatever the case is, Game Time makes all that possible. Game Time makes buying tickets easy, fast, and simple. Price in the app actually drop closer you get to first pitch. Got incredible last minute deals, clear seat views, lowest price guarantee. It takes all the worry out of buying tickets. I will say that low price guarantee is great. You get 110% credited back to your account if you find the same section in a row cheaper somewhere else. And I can verify they really mean that when they say that. Just trust me on that one. Take the guess we're going to buy tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKED on college for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code Locked On College, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Park Rangers, Locked On Coogs here. Looking at Memphis, the Big 12, how it could shift up the conference and get to Houston at some point. But I think I want to spend a second here talking about how this leaked because Monday, July 21st is an interesting date, both in that I believe if you go back, it wasn't the same day that Houston was invited to the Big 12, but I do believe it was when it felt like the Big 12 was going to fall apart a few years ago. I think that's around the same time, if not the exact same day, that Texas and Oklahoma said they were leaving the Big 12. The Big 12 had to throw out a life raft, get saved on the life raft by Houston, Central Florida, Cincinnati, and BYU. But listen, media days for the American Athletic Conference were starting. They're dropping the athletic from the conference name is now just going to be the American Conference. They have a new mascot. It is an eagle. It is odd that a conference's mascot, all the different schools who tweeted out different branding they got from the conference to send out, including Memphis, which made this extra funny. And then suddenly this leak happens and things that people I don't think knew was necessarily happening on Monday afternoon. And so I went through and kind of broke down like who would have leaked this and why. Because in these kinds of stories, that's always important. So did the ACC or some other Power Four conference leak it as some way to show that the angle there would be that they also want to add Memphis, but they want more on the table. And so they put this out there, and then it looks like the Big 12 turned it down. So then they have ground to say, well, we want 300 million, or we want this, or we want that, or we want whatever added to this deal. Could the ACC be putting that out there to kind of ruin Memphis in the American Conference while also upping the ante for an offer themselves? Maybe. We've seen the ACC have a deal where SMU takes no TV revenue. It would not be crazy for them to be trying to do that with somebody else in growing. Did the Pac-12 leak this? There's been talk about the Memphis to the Pac-12 as they were rebuilding that conference. There's also been talk about putting football in the Pac-12 for Memphis and then trying to put their basketball program in the Big East. And could the Pac-12 be trying to ruin Memphis's relationship with the American and doing that? It also, for what it's worth, would be well, Memphis is going to do all this to go to the Big 12. They would do a lot less. It would make it not so crazy, do something smaller and go to the Pac-12. Pac-12 is a rebuilding conference, right? I think that's in fair play. Did Memphis themselves leak it? I think that's an interesting plausibility here. It's a way for the school to signal to their donors, yes, we understand you're donating a ton of money. We're looking at ways to creatively spend that money and power. And it's validating the donations they're asking for a school the size of them and Memphis and the athletic program the size of them, and frankly, the lack of results the size of Memphis, right? It validates all those requests. It also points out that it might not be enough, right? They got turned down. So they might actually say, hey, we understand you're sending us. We actually need more than that. I could see Memphis kind of subtly leaking this at the start of the American Conference media days to try and signal to people with the spotlights on them, hey guys, we need more cash if we're going to do that, right? I could see Memphis angling for that themselves. I could see Yormark in the Big 12 leaking this too, though, as a way to say, hey, we are open for business, as Yormark always says. However, we ain't just taking every bit of business. Certainly not anymore, right? It's a way to show the world that, hey, you've got options, right? To whomever they're looking at. Maybe Yormark's talking to UConn and Gonzaga somewhat subtly, hey, we're turning down this deal from Memphis. You should take the deal we're offering you, right? With whatever the case may be. Maybe it's a way that your market is signaling to the high different companies that are donating high dollar amounts in sponsorship dollars, whatever. Like, hey, we're turning down all this sponsorship money because we got options, right? Like, maybe there's some sort of a signal there from your mark. Maybe it's a signal that your mark is waiting for that 2030 scramble where he's saying, hey, the ACC could fully fall apart by then. And we don't touch on it often on this show. Drake talks about it more regularly over in Locked On Big 12. It certainly comes up in Locked On College Football, but the ACC very realistically could be falling apart by 2030, 31 because of the way that the Grand Rights deal has been restructured and Florida State wants out, Clemson wants out, et cetera, right? And those big brands could shake up the conference enough to really disintegrate that whole thing. And so, like, maybe it's signaling to like those ACC schools, like, hey, we're not taking Memphis, we're holding spots for you. Like, hey, what's the Motel 6 to lead light on for you? Like, doing that kind of a thing for the ACC schools. I think that's fair and in play there. I think it also, though, is just in play to say, this is Brett Yormark just kind of putting on the table and saying, like, listen, it is not 2021 anymore. In 2023, you pulled in those four corner schools, you sunk the Pac 12, you changed the game. You're in the driver's seat now. Yormark has said repeatedly, time and time again, we're not looking outwards. We're not looking at anyone else. This is us doing the best thing for us we can do. And I think that getting offered a deal where Memphis is paying all this sponsorship dollar is probably not the best deal Yormark thinks he can get. It's not the same kind of value as if they are going to pay into the conference, right? It also, for what it's worth, whether it isn't an expulsion clause, a kicking them out in 2031 clause, you do get tied to Memphis for the next 5 years. That's regardless of their probation, whatever happens to athletic departments, ups and downs, all of that. You've seen Houston basketball coming to the Big 12 in a revenue sport and dominating like it has kind of been the outlier. Cincinnati has had a lot of trouble in every sport. West Virginia had trouble when they first came over. TCU had a couple stumbles when they first came over, and frankly, still you could argue has stumbles. Over a decade later, they had obviously a couple good years too. I don't mean to say they haven't. BYU is looking to move up in the world. They had a good football season last year. That first year was rocky. Central Florida, what happened to Central Florida, right? Like, I think it's worth pointing out. He's saying, hey, like, we don't have to just take this anymore. Houston basketball came in. We talked about the money that basketball run made for Houston. It made a lot of money for the conference as well. I think that's valuable and speaks for itself. I also wonder, and this is probably where I leave the league segment at the Big 12 league, that I don't mean to make Memphis the girl that doesn't get asked at the dance, but it does kind of feel like Memphis will still be there next summer and the summer after that and the summer after that if you're the Big 12. You can wait this out and see what other options there are until 2030. And 2031, you hadn't had any other dance partners. Oh, come on, Memphis. We'll bring you in, right? Like, Memphis doesn't have, at this moment, the academic prowess to be a Big Ten school and might not be an ACC school either. We talked to this show at one point about how Couture raising the academic profile of Houston actually makes it more like, but the Big Ten has pretty strong AAU, not written in code, but more or less requirements for being member schools. You see Purdue's, you see Northwestern's, you see Michigan's, right? Like, that's a common trait across those schools. You also in the ACC have Virginia, North Carolina is a very elite school. It's hard to get into from out of state. It's like 19% of the entire school is from out of state, so it's really hard to get into that 19%. Duke, obviously, they added Cal and Stanford. The ACC has fairly high regard for their own academic prowess, rightly or wrongly. I could point to other schools in the conference, but I'm not going to. So they've got that thing going for them as well, right? Memphis doesn't fit any of that, and it would take some shifting and changing to do that. On the other side, you've got the SEC as another power conference that I guess the SEC could be the fourth option here as far as like what they want, but the SEC doesn't want to add Memphis on a number of reasons. Regionality, they've already got University of Tennessee, and they've already got Vanderbilt. They don't need that region in any way. If you think you could argue that adding Memphis hurts their presence in that region, and I don't think that the SEC wants any of that. The SEC certainly doesn't want off-campus venues. That's kind of antithetical to the tailgating atmosphere in that conference, and I don't think it makes dollars or cents for them to do that. The Pac-12 isn't a power conference yet either. The Big 12 can sit comfortably with schools like Houston and whatever for the next several years. Like, okay, if we want to dance with if we want to dance to Memphis, we'll dance with them later, right? We don't have to do it in the first slow song. And I think that's another one of these things that could be happening. But the ultimate question here for Houston Cougar fans, you waited this long, is what would adding or what does not adding Memphis do for Houston? I do want to get into that, but I also want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at Monarch Money. Now, listen, you might not have the kind of money like FedEx throw around, but if you ever thought that, managing money should be a lot easier, Monarch Money makes sure that it is. Whether you're growing your savings, planning for big purchases, whatever the case may be, Monarch Money puts you in the driver's seat, like having a personal CFO, full visibility control. It's more than just a budgeting app, complete financial control center, accounts, investments, spending all in one place. Listen, you can stop just at managing money, so really building wealth. Again, I teach, coach, podcast, wife incomes, all put together, one single dashboard, all there for you to see. Also to see things like, hey, Parker's eating a lot of takeout because it didn't give himself any time to cook. Okay, well, let's start figuring some things out and moving things around. Helps you make those kinds of decisions to make sure that you're not spending too much money on takeout, eating out, Netflix, or whatever your streaming service of choice may be. It helps you reduce subscriptions and keep control of your finance. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first full year. Park Ranger, the Locked On Coogs here. We spent 2 segments somewhat bashing Memphis. And while it feels very Houston Cougar fan to do, we also want to talk about what this does for the University of Houston, because at the end of the day, I think a lot of people from Houston that wanted to add Memphis saw from 2 perspectives. The first one is saw the dollar amount and said, listen, we've been broke in the past. We're not quite broke right now, but ain't a bad thing to have some money. And I get that part of this too, right? But hear me out here. The money isn't that liquid, tangible form. Houston needs money in the sense of, hey, we're building a new facility for football. Hey, this house settlement comes through. We need to put $20.5 million in our athletes' pockets. Hey, we need to pay for these new coaches. Hey, we need to pay these buyouts from old coaches. Like we need money now, not sponsorship money, like the theoretical, hypothetical, it'll trickle into your account over the course of watching how it adds up over time. I need a check. And this didn't really add that in the same kind of way that adding a Power 4 established program to the Big 12 would. And so I see a lot of people saying that Houston should take that it would help Houston for the Big 12 to take the money. And if it were that kind of money, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I will say that Memphis not taking a TV revenue share would probably mean it doesn't hurt Houston's money. So that's probably a fair argument. I'm not going to argue against that. The other argument I think Houston fans make, though, is fair. And I've been actually kind of already looking at this. I've talked to Cam Stewart, Locked On Baylor, Stephen Simcox, Locked On TCU, Chris Love and Case Cowan over at Locked On Texas Tech. I've talked to Cody Stovall, Locked On Oklahoma State. A little bit of Mountaineer Paul at West Virginia. I've talked to Christian Raw even at Kansas State. Does Houston, excuse me, I'm getting excited, but does Houston need an in-conference rival, right? Does Houston need that? Memphis coming to the Big 12 would have fixed all those problems. It absolutely, in football and basketball, whatever jokes want to crack at them, whatever thing, it was always a fun atmosphere, a fun game, and it probably teetered on the line of fun and disturbing online as far as social media presence goes. But it was a fun rivalry in a lot of those senses, and it certainly become that as both programs went from Conference USA to the American. And I do understand and I do empathize with that point. I want to stress that on a pure athletic point of view, having a true rival in conference that you've built up over time would be fun. You don't have to manufacture it like the space race. You have to find the in-state things like your in-state schools. You have to create the I-10, the newest version of the I-10 battle with Arizona State, right? You'd have an actual rival in conference. And I do think that even when you drop those sometimes, those are the fun games to be a part of. And I thoroughly do think that that would be a benefit for you. Now, do I think you can build that with programs existing in the Big 12? Yes. Houston and Memphis were not rivals in 2004. They just weren't. But they grew to be over the next, almost 20 years. And I feel like you can look at that with Houston and other schools. I think you're kind of on the way there with Tech right now. I could see you doing it with Baylor in the near future. I don't think that that's that crazy a concept to say that you're going to build with these in-state schools. As far as out-of-state schools go, I think you got a basketball thing going with Iowa State. I could see something happening in football with Kansas State. You kind of ruined their season last year. Can you do something similar in the near future and kind of keep things? We'll see, right? We'll see how those things go. And I'm not opposed to the Central Florida space race. I think some people are, all in there, got their shorts in a wad over that because they can't wrap their head around like manufacturing a rivalry. Adding Memphis means you don't have to manufacture one. That's something I can't argue against, right? That's a real deal shot at a rivalry. One that I felt like we had the upper hand in more times than not as of late. Certainly the ones that jump to mind. I guess was it 2023 they beat Houston without Sasser? It must have been 2023 they beat Houston without Sasser in the conference title game, but Houston beat them twice throughout the year. Anyway, that's not here and there. I feel like that's the biggest loss here for Houston. The gains, you get to laugh at Houston on Twitter all the time. No, but on a more serious note, I think it indicates a gain for the conference that Houston's in the big time, right? And adding yourself to the big time means that you're no longer adding schools with no on-campus venues that are, kind of always in trouble and always flirting with breaking laws and rules and whatever. Like, you're not doing that anymore. You're past that, right? And listen, the Big 12 just signed a big PayPal deal worth $1 million. Brett Yormark may feel that tying to FedEx and AutoZone and what was the other one? Lowe's, tying yourself to those for the sake of bringing in a Memphis may not be worth it when you can hit the open market, let some capitalism work, and get a better deal. Right? Like, I think that part of it can get fixed, can get made up, can get figured out. And I frankly have no reason to doubt that Brett Yormark can do that. I can't make up for the rivalry part of that. I can't do it. I think the rest of it, though, makes it make sense. I think we can manufacture some rivalry part of it with other people. And we'll probably investigate that some, of course, the next few days and weeks before football season starts. We've got a Peace Jam wrap up, too. I'm working on getting some people on to talk about that. However, Coogs play again Tuesday night at 8 o'clock local time. I believe it's FS1 this time around. They're it's not team challenge. There was supposed to be challenge day. It's the Wichita State team in Wichita State, the Aftershocks. They're playing that one, some TBTs got that coming up as well. All things Houston Cougars, forever Cougs, future Cougs, past Cougs, all the time here at Locked On Cougs. So hit subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live. Locked On Cougs, primarily Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.